I'm 67 with a back that fusses if I sit too long, so I stand to work. Piano benches are for the young and flexible. I carry my toolkit in a canvas bag rubbed smooth by years, mutes, rubber wedges, a tuning lever with a nick, for my grandson's first attempt at helping. An old A440 fork I struck on the knee of a woman I loved and then left. I make rooms behave. That's what a tuner does. You listen and bring things into line until someone else knocks them out again. It was a wet afternoon when we gathered at my grandmother's house, the old place above the harbor with shingles that drink rain. The smell came first, like it always did, lemon oil and wool and the faint sour of old sheet music. Grandma was named Evelyn, but to most of us she was Evie, which never fit the way she held people at attention with a look. She'd gone to the hospital during a mild stretch in early spring and never came back. The funeral was simple. Evie always said the living shouldn't be made to sit more than they have to. After the graveside murmur, we trailed back to the house and let the door shut on wind and gulls. There were 6 of us that mattered. My brother Caleb, who sells recreational boats to people with no time to use them. My sister Ruth, a nurse with hands like a fever breaking. Our cousins, Mara with her sharp opinions and a thrift store coat she wore like a dare, Jonah, who always stood as if ready to apologize, and Ivy, the youngest, who still made the room tilt when she laughed. We were the ones who had been fed on the same summer pies and winter stews at this table. The others had drifted off over the years, to Seattle, to Phoenix, to whatever you call a place where you never meet your mailman's gaze. I say mattered because Evie's house was a pie too, and everyone knew how she cut slices. She had a long memory and a short fuse for slights. The first time she demoted Ruth from pie slice to sliver was on July 13 years ago, when Ruth forgot to call on Mother's Day and then made the mistake of saying Mother's Day was a manufactured holiday. Evie was a champion at turning the petty into ledger entries. She said a person who thinks a day is made up will think you are too. So when the estate was read, if you can call standing in a damp parlor a reading, we weren't shocked. We were light-headed with it, but not shocked. No men in suits. Evie hated men who explained things slowly. She had left instructions with a friend at the senior center, who walked out a week before the funeral and handed Ruth a folded page. We stood in our coats while Ruth ran her finger down the lines like she was checking a drip. The house goes to Mara, she read, swallowing. The harbor box goes to Ivy. She paused. Caleb gets the truck. Harlan, that's me, gets the metronome. Jonah cleared his throat hard enough to scrape paint. And me? Ruth read the last line and winced without meaning to. Jonah gets $1 and the privilege of visiting, if invited. We all inhaled in the same narrow measure. I had tuned that metronome a lifetime ago with a butter knife and a prayer. It was shaped like a pyramid, walnut dulled by generations of impatient fingers. I set it beside the old upright whenever I tuned, more for show than use. Evie loved to crank it too fast to shame us into practicing scales. Mara's face lit briefly, then shuddered. Of course, she said. Petty to the end. Caleb's laugh came out like he was testing a room. Truck's a 98 with a cracked windshield, he said. She always loved her jokes. Ivy didn't look up. Which harbor box? She asked. She had 2. The good one, Ruth said, eyes back on the page. The green locker by Slip C. I saw Ivy's left shoulder drop. An old tell from childhood when she wanted to hide happiness. Jonah stared at the floor like it had taken something from him. If Evie had planned this to needle every sore spot, she'd hit them clean. Where's the metronome? I asked. In the parlor, Ruth said. She had me winded last week when I brought her the basil plant. Said she liked the sound. I knew that wasn't true. Evie couldn't stand a steady click after her hearing turned. It made her jaw tick. I tucked the detail away and let everyone talk. They argued about fairness. Ruth didn't engage, because fairness is a fever that runs until it breaks. Caleb kept circling back to the principle of the thing. which only mattered now that the truck was a joke and someone else had gotten the house. Mara did her little shrugging smile and said they were welcome to sleep on the porch if they needed time to adjust. Ivy squeezed my arm once when no one looked and whispered that she hadn't asked for any of this. Jonah didn't say a word. I slipped into the parlor and closed the door until it hummed, not latched. The upright sat in the same corner where Evie had parked me after school. I could see where small palms had polished the fallboard. The metronome stood on top, centered like a spare headstone. I wound it once and set it ticking. The click was wrong, a hair off to the left of true. My hands found the key slip and eased it off. Felt dust came up in a little storm. The middle A was flat, deliberately. You don't get that kind of flatness by neglect. You get it by nudging the pin and stopping before the lever squeals. Someone had been in here, and recently. I opened the metronome and checked the compartment under the weight rod. Empty, which was interesting only because I had left it empty. The little brass key I'd tucked there last week had been a decoy from the start. A spare locker key from my bowling bag, polished to a shine with lemon oil. I wanted to see who would bite. The real thing was something else, something Evie and I had worked out over tea when the season turned and she admitted her hearing made the gulls sound like kettles. "People listen with their eyes, Harlan," she'd said, tapping the metronome. "Give them a click and they'll swear they heard time passing." She'd asked me for one favor, not to right her wrongs, because she hadn't admitted they were wrongs, just to make sure the right person reached the wrong thing first. She'd smiled when she said it, and there was a little of the girl in the photograph on the mantel, the one with a bicycle and a skirt too short for her mother's comfort. "We'll call it a tune-up," she said. "You're good at those." I had flattened the middle A and left it like a tripwire. Only someone who couldn't stand dissonance would correct it without asking. I told myself that would be Caleb, because he spends his days pretending to like whatever squeal the customer wants. But he never touched an instrument again after high school. If he noticed, he'd shrug. Ruth doesn't care for pianos beyond their surfaces. Mara would fix it just to assert a boundary. Ivy would leave it alone out of respect. Jonah, though. Jonah had been the one who, at 12, memorized the fingering to Blackbird and hid in this very room to practice it until his wrists ached. The metronome's tick sharpened in my ear. I muted the middle strings and tested the unisons, then let the dabbers fall. Someone had corrected the flat A, then nudged it back. Clumsy fingers too eager. The pin set had a smear of something dark near the 47th note. I touched it and lifted my finger to my nose. Coffee and salt. Jonah loved pretzels when he was nervous. I was making a story out of crumbs, I know, but that's how you do this without breaking things. A tuner learns that a room will tell you who's been sitting in it if you listen. My job is reading what's left behind when people think they've wiped their prints. When I came back out, the air tasted like a fight that hadn't found its shape. Mara had poured herself more wine than was polite. Caleb had opened the back door and was smoking in the drizzle, an old habit returned without apology. Ruth was folding paper napkins into smaller squares she'd never use. Ivy had her hands around a mug like a small fire lived there. Jonah wasn't in the room. "Where's Jonah?" I asked. "Bathroom," Mara said. "Or vanished in a pout. I don't catalog grown men." "He'll be back," Ruth said, always covering. I set the metronome on the table among the mustard and cold chicken. "Let's make a small game of it," I said, careful to keep my tone the way Evie liked, light with iron under it. Gran had a habit of hiding good ideas and bad ones. She left me this because she wanted it used. If anyone found something rattling inside earlier, I'd appreciate it back. Call it a sentimental thing. Caleb laughed like he had a fishbone stuck. "You're sentimental now?" "About what she trusted me to fix," I said. "That's all." Ruth looked at me with the nurse glance that catches fevers early. Ivy stared at the metronome like it had turned to an animal. Mara twirled her ring and said nothing. Jonah came back, hands dry, eyes flat. He regarded the metronome as if testing whether it belonged to this world. "I didn't touch her toys," he said. Good, I said, and let the word sit. I waited until dust pressed the windows blue. People shifted. Goodbyes formed and then broke and reformed. The house did its old breathing, wood and water speaking in the walls. I pocketed the metronome and said I'd take the upright for a cleaning next week, which was a lie designed to see who would object. No one did. That told me something too. Out on the porch, Caleb flicked ash into the rain. You think Mara deserves the house? He asked without turning. That woman traded a set of wedding china for a German shepherd because she said plates were for people who sat still. It's what Evie wanted, I said. What Evie wanted changes with the weather. Then call it a squall, I said, and hang on. He snorted. You always had a way with messes. It's a trade, I said. You listen. You nudge. You let the string settle. When I left, the harbor was a fist of black pepper under the streetlights. I carried the metronome like a loaf of bread. In the truck, I struck the tuning fork against the dash and brought it to my ear. The note vibrated into the bones above my jaw. I thought of Evie's hands gripping her teacup. Her mouth turned as she asked if I wouldn't mind sweetening the bitter. Not law, not paperwork, just a small tilt of the room. Back at my place, I opened the metronome again and checked a hidden chamber under the felt lining. A place I'd cut years back with a patient blade. Empty, as expected. The decoy key was gone. That was fine. It would lead to the wrong locker, the one with the warped lid where I kept rusted hammers and old strings. The right thing. The only thing that mattered was still where we'd set it, tucked into something so obvious no one would look. The soft belly of the piano bench cushion, taped with surgical care. I leaned back and let the rain patter find its rhythm. Then I stopped listening to weather and heard something else from inside the metronome, a soft tick I hadn't set, not the pendulum. A click like a relay. I tilted it to the light. Inside the cavity where wood should be, I saw the faintest line of new glue. Someone had been in there after me and built their own hiding place within the hollow I thought only I knew. I pressed the seam and felt the panel give. Underneath was a folded scrap of cloth, the color of old cherries, and a small, brutal thing wrapped in it. A knotted bit of braided hair. I recognized from a lock. Ivy had cut at 14, and kept because she said, "You shouldn't waste good rope." There was also a sliver of sea glass and a note with no words, just a drawn circle with a slash through it. I sat very still. This wasn't Evie's hand. It was Jonah's doodle. He carved that circle, with a slash into the picnic table one summer, to show he was done with something. As if the air could hear, I put the cloth back and closed the instrument. I had thought I was the one setting traps. I had thought I'd taught him to listen once, and he'd forgotten. He hadn't. Somewhere between the grave and Ruth's kitchen, Jonah had taken the decoy and left me a message inside my own game. He wanted me to know he knew, or he wanted me to feel what knowing did to a person. Either way, it meant the next move needed to be careful and not written down. Evie said, "People show you what they think they deserve," and she wasn't often wrong. I washed my hands and stared at the old man in the mirror with lemon oil in the lines of his palms. Then I called Ivy and asked if she'd like a ride to the harbor locker in the morning to see her inheritance proper. She hesitated, and I added that we'd stop for pastries. Ivy is not immune to a good pastry. She said yes, and her voice had a thread in it I couldn't name. I hung up and took the metronome apart again. I took the new panel too, and pocketed Jonah's little bundle. I set the pendulum to a beat just a shade too fast. Somewhere in there I made a decision that would either save this family from the kind of ugliness you can't ever tune out, or send it howling into a place only the gulls enjoy. When I finished, I sat in the dark and listened to the tick until it wasn't there anymore. Then I lit the stove and brewed tea the way Evie liked on cold evenings, with a coin's worth of salt to lift the edge. I swallowed it hot and planned the story I'd tell at breakfast. Not to persuade, not to confess. To invite someone to show me the thing they'd never say. I'm not a detective. I repair temperaments. If you get it wrong, the string snaps and whips your eye. If you get it right, you hear the room sigh. Tomorrow, at Slip C, I would open a box with my niece and hand her a choice that was never really hers. I would offer Caleb a ride and let him make his own mistake. I would watch Mara test the railings for weaknesses and Jonah test the air for mine. And I would let the metronome sit on the piano bench, clicking just a hair fast, until whoever couldn't stand it reached over and corrected it in front of everyone. One more thing. In the morning, I'd place a different object in plain sight where only a certain kind of person would see it. A cracked ivory key Evie had pried off the upright years ago and kept in her junk drawer for good luck. If my hunch about old injuries was right, that small relic would pull up a root we'd all pretend it had rotted away. This is the part where I tell you something true. I asked Evie to split the estate unevenly. I suggested the house go to Mara and the harbor box to Ivy. I told her Caleb would survive the truck insult and Jonah would make a show of being above it. I said Ruth would hold us together no matter what. I believed then that I could guide the storm to the harbor. Now, I'm not so sure. Morning came with a damp brightness that fooled the joints until you stood. I stretched, felt the old twinge in my right shoulder where a fall from a ladder had left its weather report, and set the metronome to tick 2 hairs fast. I cleaned the coffee stain off the tuning lever and slid the cracked ivory key into my pocket where a good lie belongs. Close, with edges. I picked up Ivy and a box of pastries, sugared enough to make the day forgive itself. She wore a blue raincoat from a thrift shop, collar turned against a breeze that couldn't decide to settle. "You don't have to do this," she said as we drove past the cannery. "I can open a locker on my own." "You can," I said, "but then I'd miss the chance to act like I'm useful." She smiled in the way that hides and shows at once. "You're useful. Just maybe not in ways people like." We found Caleb already at the marina, hands in his jacket, pretending he wasn't early. Ruth came in her sensible shoes, the ones she calls her truce makers, and Mara drifted down the ramp like it belonged to her now, which technically it didn't, not yet. Jonah stood apart, looking at the water with a face he might have hammered into shape overnight. "Where's the exalted box?" Caleb said. He tapped the dock planks with his boot like he was checking a rotten board. "Slip C," I said. "Green locker." Evie's old padlock. She loved the way it sounded. "Like a small door closing," Ruth said softly. She'd click it twice. We walked the long L of the dock, passing boats with names that show the difference between money and joy. A gull washed us with the unearned scorn of a judge. I let Ivy step up to the locker while I looked at the people I grew out of. Old music, same key, different tempos. Ivy held out her hand for the key. I had the real one, thin and mean, and for a second I almost handed her the decoy to see who flinched. But games work until they don't. I gave her the right one, and she slipped it in with a motion that knew the lock. It turned too easily. The locker had been opened recently and relocked without grit. My neck prickled. Inside sat a battered canvas bag, a coil of old line, and a child's music book swollen from humidity. No jewel boxes, no envelopes so fat they cut your fingers. Ivy set the music book on the dock and brushed rain off the cover with her palm. A drawn circle with a slash sat in the corner, darkened by years. "Jonah's mark." Ruth picked up the bag and winced at the weight. "Sand," she said. She opened it and found sand. Fine harbor grit, poured to the brim. She dug and hit metal, the jagged corner of a no-wake plate, bent and scraped raw. She looked at me like I was supposed to explain what no one had admitted. Caleb snorted. "Perfect." "Trash." Mara flipped through the music book. "Look at this," she said. Page after page of beginner pieces marked with penciled notes. The hard circles I used to draw over the notes that refused to sound. The middle A had a careful X through it on half the pages. "Somebody didn't like A," she said. "Join the club." Jonah had remained silent. He bent, took the book from Mara, and held it without turning pages, the way a man holds a memory. Then he looked at me. His face was easy the way ice is easy to skate until you find the crack. "You and your little tests," he said conversationally, as if we were arguing over trout weights. The flat A, the decoy key W, the metronome clicking just sharp enough to make a person's molars meet. He glanced at Ivy, then back to me. You talk about tuning temperaments, Uncle Harlan, but what you like most is the part where you hear a person break. The gulls quieted. Even the water paused. Jonah, Ruth murmured, warning built into his name. He watched me. Go ahead. Tell them you helped Evie cut the pie crooked. Tell them you decided who deserved heat and who should go cold. They all looked at me, Caleb with something like delight, Mara with a laureless grin, Ivy with her mouth a straight line. I felt the weight of my pocketed key, a little bone, and would have paid good money not to be 67 in that moment. I didn't deny it. A lie now would turn rot sweet, and not for long. I advised her, I said. I thought I was guiding weather, not lightning. I was wrong about some of it. Some, Mara repeated, tasting the word. And he said bait, Jonah said. He held up the music book, the circle with a slash staring like a one-eyed thing. At the house, too. You were going to put the metronome on the bench and measure who twitched. I was going to see who couldn't stand a bad beat, I said. It's a way to know a person who lies well. Here's a simpler way, he said, turning to the others. Ask him what he's really after. Ruth's voice was calm because she had to be. Harlan? I reached into the locker and took out the coil of line. It was braided tight, 3 thin strands twined. A small, inert snake. The braid pattern wasn't random. It had a notch where the maker's fingers had lost count, and corrected by feel. I'd seen that notch before, aged now into memory. On a girl's head of 14, when she spent summer evenings braiding and unbraiding her hair to avoid doing dishes. I wanted this, I said. I wanted what this points to. Caleb shifted, the dock answering his weight. Nautical rope points to boats, he said. Good job. Kill switch lanyard, I said. Quiet, and held up the end with a loop tied the way you loop a wrist. The sand fell out of it in little sighs. Wrapped right, braided right, and if you look close. Stop, Ivy said. Her voice didn't break, it hardened. She stepped between me and the others, palm out. The rain made small diamonds on her coat. You think you're the only one who can set a scene, she said to me. You think you invented prods and prompts? She reached into her coat and took out a small plastic clip, red faded toward pink. I recognized the brand, everyone on this dock did. It's the mouth of the thing you snap onto a boat's ignition, so if you fall overboard, the engine can't keep going without you. The other end was braided hair, dull blonde turned to rope, mended where someone had cut and tied it years ago. The same notch as the line in my hand. Ivy swallowed. When she spoke, each word came measured all the same. It wasn't Caleb that night, she said. He covered. I was steering. Caleb's mouth opened and closed, a man sliding on black ice. Ivy, he said, and his voice had no place to land. Mara took a step back like the dock had dipped under her. Ruth's hands found each other and gripped as if she could keep circulation going in us all. Jonah watched Ivy and looked relieved, which told me what I should have guessed. He had set me up to set her up, or the other way around, and either way, he had known where we'd land. The circle with the slash wasn't an end. It was a warning that someone might cut the line. You were 14, Ruth said finally, hoarse. You weren't allowed to take the skiff out after dusk. That's one fact, Ivy said. Here's another. I took it anyway. I was angry that summer at every rule because it felt like a net. Caleb followed in another boat in case I got in trouble, which I did. She held up the lanyard. This broke when the engine cut. It shouldn't have, but it did. The line slipped, and I chased the hat, the one that blew off the man we nearly clipped. I keep seeing that hat. Every time I close my eyes. Silence spread its blanket. It could have gone on all afternoon if we'd let it. Mara found her voice first, too sharp. You think telling this now fixes everything? Evie thought. Giving me the house patched an old hole. You think I'm supposed to sew up the rest for free? I'm not asking you for forgiveness, Ivy said. I'm telling you what was true. And I'm telling you something else, Jonah cut in, eyes on me. He didn't just advise. He told Evie who to wound. He thought hurting me would flush me out. $1 and the privilege of visiting. That was your line, wasn't it? I was tired of being 50-50 with him. Yes, I said, because of what you carved into that picnic table the night after. A circle with a slash. You were done protecting, but you didn't tell. You let it rot. Jonah's jaw clicked. I was 12, he said. And there it was. The boy climbing out of a shell he never chose. I didn't tell because I didn't want to be the person who made our house a shouting place. Ruth closed her eyes once, a nurse blinking. We are in it now, she said. Footsteps sounded on the dock behind us, measured, unhurried. Mr. Barlow from the bait shop stopped a few yards off, drawn by weather that smelled like family. Everything all right? He asked, meaning not is it, but should I go? We're fine, Caleb said automatically. Of course we are, Mara said, voice bright to the point of breaking. We're a model of civility. Mr. Barlow took the hint and moved on, his dog glancing back with the pity only dogs manage without offense. The moment felt delicate, as a newly tuned A waiting for a hammer. I took the metronome from my bag and set it on the locker. The tick entered the air like a truth you can't unhear. Jonah flinched. Caleb rolled his shoulders. Mara watched the swing with the same attention she gave to other people's slip-ups. Ivy didn't look at it at all. I'm not trying to punish, I said. I'm trying to place weight where it belongs. We can pretend Evie was petty for sport, or we can admit she was balancing something that leans. What balances this? Mara said, sharp as a snap string. Maybe the part where Caleb protected Ivy because he couldn't stand to see her turn into someone else's story, I said, angling the words the way you angle a lever to nudge a pin. Caleb's head jerked. His face was naked as a room without curtains. Don't turn me into a saint, he said. I told her to floor it when she should have cut. That's on me. Ivy shook her head. It's on me because I took the wheel. Don't you dare steal my fault. She lifted the lanyard like a flag and then, with a motion so quick it erased our watchfulness, she flicked it out over the water. It caught the morning like a fish and arced. The red clip flashed once, as if thinking about a different ending. Then the whole thing dropped and vanished. I heard the faintest plop, then only the gulls again, laughing at nothing. No, Jonah said. He lunged to the edge, half a step from going in. He stared down like the dark could give it back. Ivy turned to me, eyes steady. There's another piece, she said. The part Evie asked me to keep until you showed you deserved it. The thing that explains why she gave the house to Mara at all. My hand went to the crack key in my pocket without permission. It was suddenly heavy. Where? I asked, too fast. She didn't answer me. She slid her hand into her coat and pulled out a flat shape wrapped in wax cloth the size of a notebook. She pressed it to her chest like a life preserver. Then she looked at Jonah, then at Mara, then at me again. I'll show it, she said, but not here. Where? Mara asked. Ivy scanned the harbor like she was tuning in. The parlor, she said, with the upright. You want your metronome? Bring it. We started to move together, the awkward ballet of people with too much in their heads and not enough in their hands. Then a shout carried over the water from the mouth of the marina, older and more frightened than I ever want to hear again. A small skiff had drifted loose and was nosing the rocks past the jetty, engine idling, no one aboard. It wore a blue tarp like a cape and caught the swell wrong. The motor hiccuped high, then low, then high again, unable to find its rest. No one noticed it until the bow kissed stone and the engine coughed up a spume that smelled like old summers and mistakes. Jonah said, That's Evie's old outboard. His voice cracked clean through the years. He looked at me, then past me. How did... Behind us, wood creaked. The green locker door we'd propped open crept shut and lashed itself with a click that sounded like a small door closing twice. The walk back to the house was slow because no one wanted to get there first. Caleb kept glancing at the harbor like the skiff might turn itself around. Ruth walked in the middle, the way she always did in winter storms, her step steady so others could match her rhythm. Mara lit a cigarette and let the ash fall on the dock without tapping. She liked watching things burn themselves down. Jonah stayed just behind Ivy, his eyes on the waxed cloth bundle she carried against her ribs. I carried the metronome in my bag. The tick stopped, the way you hold a question too long. The parlor felt smaller than I remembered. The smell of lemon oil sharper in the damp. Ivy went straight to the upright, set the bundle on top, and waited. No speech, no build-up. She unwrapped the cloth to reveal a sheet of music, thick with tape along the folds. The title faded but still legible, Harbor Waltz, composed by Evelyn Marks. I'd last seen it when I was 25, leaning over her shoulder as she wrote it in pencil, humming until the notes fit the tide. She'd only played it once for the whole family. July 13, the year before Ruth's phone call mistake. Then she tucked it away. "This is what she gave me," Ivy said. "Said it was for when we'd need to remember she was more than who she'd become at the end." Caleb frowned. "It's a song. It's more than that," I said, leaning closer. At the bottom of the page, in tiny handwriting I recognized, Evie had written, "Bench." Mara raised an eyebrow, as in take a seat, or as in the piano bench you dragged out of here last week. "Bench," I repeated. My knees creaked as I pulled the cushion up. Beneath the batting and tape was the envelope I'd hidden for Evie years back. Only it wasn't alone. A second smaller envelope sat on top, newer paper, sealed with red wax pressed by a ring. Jonah's college ring, the one he swore he'd pawned. I opened Evie's first. Inside was a photograph, the harbor at dusk, Slip Sea in silhouette, and a man in a brimmed hat standing on the dock with his back to us. On the reverse she'd written, "Ask the one who turned away first." Jonah's envelope held a single metronome weight, brass-worn bright where fingers had gripped it. A note with it read, "Sometimes you don't fix the beat. You change the dance." I looked at him. "You found my hiding place before she died." He didn't deny it. "She told me about the bench. Said you'd either keep it safe or make it dangerous." "And you?" "I made it both," he said, "because I wanted you to understand something. Evie wasn't just punishing for sport. She was replaying an old score." Ivy put a hand on the upright. "It's about that night," she said. "The skiff. The man in the hat." Ruth's face was pale now. "Who was he?" Jonah answered, voice low. "Evie's brother. Left town in '62 after a fight over their father's boat. She told me he came back quiet, watched from the dock while she played this waltz for the first and last time. Then he turned and left again. She said it was the only time she wished she'd chased someone." The room was still except for the faint creak of the floorboards. Mara finally stubbed her cigarette out on her shoe sole. "So this is all about some man who left 60 years ago." "It's about leaving," Jonah said. "About who you follow and who you let go." He looked straight at me. "And about the danger of deciding for other people." I thought of the skiff that morning, engine coughing against the rocks, a ghost of Evie's brother's boat in its lines. Maybe it had been tied up for years. Maybe someone set it loose as a message. Either way, it had found its way back just long enough to scrape stone and vanish again. I set the metronome on the piano and fitted Jonah's weight back onto the rod. I let it tick. Slow, steady, true this time. "I thought I was keeping balance," I said. "Turns out I was keeping the fight alive." Ivy slid the music toward me. "Play it." My fingers hadn't touched keys in months, but they remembered the shape. The harbor waltz began soft, a sway with the tide, then stumbled deliberately in the middle, like a boat catching the wrong current, before finding its way home. As I played, I saw Evie's hands in my mind, how she'd press a note just long enough to make you lean in. When the last chord faded, no one spoke. Mar was watching the rain slide down the window like she'd never seen it before. Caleb had his eyes closed. Ruth's hands were still. Jonah stood by the door, listening as if the room might breathe different now. I closed the lid. So, what do we do with the house? Mara gave a thin smile. We keep it open. For all of us. Even the ones who don't visit. I waited for someone to argue. No one did. The metronome kept ticking, and I left it on the upright. I knew someone would stop it eventually, maybe out of irritation, maybe just to hear the room go quiet. But for now, the beat was steady, and in the stillness after each click, you could almost hear the harbor answering back. That night, I dreamed of Evie on the dock, skirt whipping in the wind, turning at the last second before her brother vanished. She didn't chase him. She just stood there, letting the tide come in. In the morning, I took the cracked ivory key from my pocket and set it on the windowsill, where anyone could see it. Then I made tea with a coin's worth of salt and listened for the beat under the silence, because sometimes revenge is just a way of keeping time until you're ready to change the dance.